The Shadowed Pines. This is a story about a little trip into the wilderness, a romantic getaway, you might say, for a young couple named Mark and Emily. They thought they were heading for peace and quiet, a chance to reconnect under the vast, indifferent sky. But sometimes, out there in the deep woods, under the ancient trees, what you find isn't peace at all. Sometimes, you find something else entirely. And sometimes, that something else, well, it finds you. Chapter 1. A retreat to the wilderness. Mark and Emily had always been a puzzle, even to themselves. On the outside, they looked like the perfect couple. Mark, with his easy smile and a job in finance that kept them in a comfortable modern apartment. Emily, a freelance graphic designer, whose artistic spirit seemed to balance Mark's practical nature. But lately, the balance was off. A silence had settled between them, a stillness that was more unsettling than any argument. It was a silence filled with unspoken resentments and the quiet hum of a relationship running on fumes. Mark, ever the planner, decided a trip was in order. A retreat, a chance to reset. He picked a spot deep in the Shadowed Pines forest, a place so remote it barely had a name. No cell service, no other people, just them, just the woods. The drive was long. The highway gave way to a 2-lane blacktop, which eventually turned into a washboard gravel road that seemed to stretch on forever. The trees, thick and ancient, pressed in on either side, their long shadowy arms reaching across the road as if to close it off. Mark, focused on the winding turns, seemed oblivious to the encroaching gloom. He was humming a jaunty tune, his face alight with an enthusiasm that felt, to Emily, a little too forced. Emily, however, felt the quiet dread settle over her. A cold, creeping feeling that had nothing to do with the temperature. She watched the pines, their needled branches like sharp fingers, and felt a sense of being pulled into a world she didn't know, a world she didn't want to know. When they finally arrived, the campsite was perfect. At least, that's what Mark said. A small, cleared area nestled next to a stream, surrounded by a thick wall of pine trees. The afternoon sun, filtered through the needles, cast a soft golden light. It was beautiful. Almost impossibly so, but a beauty that felt brittle, a facade. As Mark busied himself with the tent, a familiar pattern re-emerged. He was in charge. He was building their little home, their little sanctuary, while she was to simply wait. She had spent years doing just that. Waiting. As Mark wrestled with the tent poles, Emily wandered toward the creek. She found a small flat rock and sat, letting the sound of the running water wash over her. It was in that moment, in the quiet, that she noticed it. Wedged between two moss-covered rocks was a small, well-worn object. A teddy bear. Its fur was matted, its one glass eye staring blankly into the sky. It was a child's toy, a small, innocent thing that seemed utterly out of place in this vast, untamed wilderness. A little tickle of unease started in the back of Emily's mind. A child? Way out here? She picked up the bear, a tiny shiver running down her spine. The plush was damp and smelled of earth and something else she couldn't quite place. She brought it back to Mark. "Look what I found," she said, holding it out. Mark barely glanced at it. His focus was entirely on his work, on the flawless construction of their temporary shelter. "Probably just fell out of someone's backpack," he said, his voice dismissive. "People come and go, honey. It's no big deal. Leave it be." He was a man who didn't like to dwell on things, who preferred to neatly tuck away anything that couldn't be explained or solved. Emily, however, was a woman who saw stories in everything. And this little bear, with its one missing eye, was screaming a story she couldn't hear. She tucked it into her backpack, a silent act of defiance. That night, the silence of the woods became a living thing. It was a pressure, a sound in and of itself. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded like a footstep. Mark, nestled in his sleeping bag, seemed to sleep soundly. But Emily was wide awake. Sometime after midnight, she was sure she saw a flicker of light in the distance, maybe half a mile away. Just a single flash, like a match being struck, and then gone. "Did you see that?" she whispered, nudging Mark awake. He groaned, rolling over. "Emily, go to sleep. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. She was sure of it. The next day, the unease grew into a low-grade fear. As they hiked a nearby trail, Emily felt it again. The chilling sensation of being watched. She kept turning, expecting to see someone. a face in the trees. But there was never anyone there. Mark, of course, laughed it off. "You're being paranoid, Em. It's the woods. They do that to you." His calm, condescending tone only made her feel worse. She started to wonder if she was losing her mind. But then, as they rounded a bend, they both saw him. A man, standing perfectly still amongst the pines. He was tall and gaunt, with a wild, unkempt beard and eyes that seemed to stare right through them. He wore tattered clothes and a well-worn backpack. A survivalist, a hermit, a loner, or something else entirely. Mark, his face pale, froze. The man just watched them. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared. For what felt like an eternity. And then, he simply turned and disappeared into the trees, as if he had never been there at all. "That's it," Mark said, his voice a low growl. "We're leaving." But Emily, for the first time in a long time, held her ground. "No. I want to know who he is. And I want to know why I feel like we're being watched." Their argument was a brutal, whispered thing. Mark, the man who was always in control, was now afraid. And Emily, the woman who had always deferred to him, was now a portrait of defiant curiosity. They stayed. And that night, they both heard it. The sound of footsteps outside their tent. Slow, deliberate. They lay in the dark, their hearts hammering against their ribs. The footsteps stopped. A long silence. And then, a low guttural growl, as if from a wild animal. The next morning, Mark was a man possessed. He wanted to pack up and leave, his face a mask of primal fear. But Emily refused. She had a strange, unshakable feeling that the answers were here. She convinced him to stay one more night. And that afternoon, as they sat by the fire, the man from the woods reappeared. He didn't sneak up on them this time. He just walked out of the trees, his face passive, his hands empty. Mark instinctively stood up, his hand hovering over the camping knife on his belt. The man didn't seem to notice. He just sat on a log, a few feet away, and stared into the fire. "You look for something?" he asked, his voice a low, raspy whisper. Mark didn't answer. But Emily, feeling a strange pull of empathy, did. We found a teddy bear." The man's eyes, empty a moment before, seemed to fill with an ancient sorrow. "His," he said, nodding toward Emily's backpack. "My boys." He told them a story about a little boy named Leo, and a camping trip they took in these very woods. It was 5 years ago, a trip meant to celebrate his 7th birthday. The father, a single parent, had only one thing on his mind, to make his son happy. But a storm rolled in. The winds howled, the rain came down in sheets, the tent was swept away, the boy was gone. Just gone. The man, a father in agony, had been searching ever since. He lived in these woods, a ghost of a man, haunted by a little ghost of a boy. The bear, he said, was the last thing Leo had been holding. He showed them a small, faded photograph of a little boy with a gap-toothed smile, clutching a teddy bear. Mark and Emily listened in silence, their own troubles feeling small and petty in the face of this man's tragedy. He stood up, gave them a long, weary look, and disappeared into the trees again, leaving the fire to crackle and pop in the growing gloom. A heavy silence settled over their campsite. The man's story was a living thing, a real monster, a real tragedy. The fear of being watched was gone, replaced by a profound and aching sorrow. That night, for the first time since they had arrived, Mark and Emily lay in their sleeping bags, feeling safe. But as Emily lay there, the story of Leo echoing in her mind, a thought, a single, tiny, insidious thought, began to take shape. She thought of the little boy, Leo, with his gap-toothed smile and his worn teddy bear. And then she thought of Mark. "What did that man say his boy's name was?" she whispered. "Leo," Mark mumbled, half asleep. "And how old was he when he went missing?" 7, Mark said, his voice slurring. "He said he was 7. Emily sat up, a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. A detail, a single, insignificant detail she had stored away years ago, a piece of a puzzle she never knew existed, began to click into place. She had found a note in an old shoebox while helping Mark move years ago, a list of old clients. And at the bottom of the list, scribbled in Mark's handwriting, was the name, Leo's father. Mark, a man who had never spoken of his past, had been connected to this man, a man who was now a ghost in the woods. Emily's mind raced. Mark had always been so evasive about his past, particularly about a time before they had met. A time when he'd worked as a private investigator, a fact he'd always downplayed as a little side gig. And he had a habit of keeping things in the dark, a need to be in control. She thought of his dismissive attitude toward the teddy bear, his desperate need to leave the campsite. She looked at Mark's face, peaceful in the firelight. But now, it wasn't the face of a man she loved. It was the face of a stranger. A man who had just lied to her. A man who had told her the growling sound was an animal when she knew, with an awful certainty, that it had been his own voice. A man who had brought her to this specific place, the site of a 5-year-old tragedy, for reasons that were now terrifyingly unclear. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "How did you know about the growling? You were sleeping." He didn't answer. He was faking sleep. She knew it. The stillness of his body was too perfect. She thought of her own missing memories, the way Mark would always tell her stories of their shared past, filling in the blanks. He had been shaping her memories, guiding her to believe in a narrative he had created. Was he the reason Leo went missing? Was he here to silence the last witness? A witness who, until this moment, didn't even know what she had seen. She reached for the camping knife on the ground. Mark's eyes shot open. They were cold, empty. He moved with a speed that startled her. A blur of motion, his hand clamped over hers, his grip like a vice. "Emily," he said, his voice now a low, menacing whisper. "I told you. You don't ask questions out here." He wasn't a man running from danger. He was the danger. And she was trapped in a forest that was now a tomb, with a monster she had loved. She thought of the teddy bear in her backpack, of the man in the woods, still searching. And she knew. The story of what had happened to Leo wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 2. The Deepening Shadows. The grip on Emily's wrist was bone-crushing, a stark, brutal contrast to the soft touch she'd known for years. Mark's eyes, once warm and familiar, were now cold, reflecting the faint glow of the dying embers outside the tent flap. The air in their small nylon shelter was thick with unspoken words, with the sudden, terrifying understanding that Emily was no longer with a partner, but with a captor. "You don't ask questions out here," Mark repeated, his voice barely a whisper, yet it felt louder than any shout. The words were a warning, a threat, a chilling echo of the control he had always exerted, now stripped bare of its civilized veneer. Emily felt a jolt of raw, animalistic fear. It wasn't just the physical threat, it was the shattering of everything she thought she knew. The years of shared laughter, quiet evenings, whispered confidences, all of it now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. She tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened, pain shooting up her arm. "Mark, what are you doing?" Her voice was a ragged whisper, a pathetic attempt to reason with the monster that had replaced the man she loved. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "I'm doing what I have to do, Emily. What we have to do." The "we" hung in the air, a sickening implication that she was somehow complicit, that she was part of this twisted narrative. Suddenly, he released her, pushing her back against her sleeping bag. He moved with a practiced ease, pulling a small black satchel from beneath his own bag. Emily's eyes, wide with terror, watched as he rummaged inside, his movements quick and efficient. He pulled out a coil of thin, strong rope, and then, a small roll of duct tape. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mind screamed, "Run!" But her body, paralyzed by shock and fear, refused to obey. She was in the middle of nowhere, miles from any road, any help. And the man who was supposed to protect her was the one holding the rope. "Don't make this difficult, Em," he said, his voice strangely calm now, almost gentle, as if he were talking to a frightened child. That false tenderness was more terrifying than any rage. "It'll be easier for both of us if you just cooperate." He moved towards her, the rope glinting in the faint moonlight filtering through the tent. Emily found her voice, a desperate, strangled sound. "What about Leo? What did you do to him?" Mark paused, the rope still in his hands. A flicker of something, annoyance, calculation, crossed his face. "Leo's not your concern. He never was." "He was a child, Mark," he scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "A complication. Like so many other things." He advanced, and Emily scrambled back, hitting the tent wall. He grabbed her again, easily overpowering her struggles. In a matter of minutes, her wrists were bound behind her back, the rope biting into her skin. The duct tape was placed expertly over her mouth, muffling her desperate cries. He zipped up the tent, plunging them into near darkness. Emily could hear the frantic pounding of her own blood in her ears. He sat across from her, his silhouette a dark, menacing shape. He said nothing, just watched her, his breathing slow and even. The silence stretched, unbearable, broken only by the chirping of crickets outside and the distant hoot of an owl. Emily's mind raced, searching for an escape, a reason, anything to make sense of this nightmare. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and meaningless, were now snapping together with horrifying clarity. Mark's evasiveness about his past, his insistence on this remote campsite, his dismissive reaction to the teddy bear, the growling. It was all part of a larger, darker design. She remembered the way he had always controlled their shared narrative, subtly twisting memories, filling in gaps with convenient fictions. He had been manipulating her perception for years, crafting a reality that suited him. Was she a part of this plan? Was she another complication he needed to manage? The hours crawled by. Emily, exhausted and terrified, eventually drifted into a fitful sleep, her body aching, her mind haunted by the image of Leo's smiling face. When she awoke, the tent was bright with the morning light. Mark was gone. A fresh wave of panic washed over her. Had he left her? Would anyone ever find her? Then she heard his voice, calmly talking outside the tent. He was on his satellite phone, something she didn't even know he had. His voice was low, hushed, but she could make out fragments of conversation. Everything's handled. She's compliant. Yes, tonight. No loose ends. Emily's blood ran cold. Tonight. No loose ends. He wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to finish it. The realization was a punch to the gut. The tears streamed down her face, hot and silent beneath the tape. A moment later, he unzipped the tent flap. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had a plate of food in his hand, some granola and a banana. He untaped her mouth, not unkindly, but with a detached efficiency. "Eat," he ordered, holding the food out to her. Emily stared at him, hatred burning in her eyes. "Why, Mark? Why are you doing this?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her stomach churn. "It's complicated, Em. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she spat, her voice raw. He sat back on his heels, his gaze distant, as if recalling a long-forgotten lecture. 5 years ago I was hired by Leo's father. He was a wealthy man, you see, desperate. He wanted his son back. He was convinced Leo's estranged mother, a woman he despised, had taken him. Emily listened, her eyes fixed on his face. This was it, the truth. "I found Leo," Mark continued, his voice flat. "Or, rather, I found evidence that he wasn't with his mother. He'd been with his father, camping. A tragic accident. The storm, the creek, everything the old man told you. It was mostly true. The boy fell in, got swept away. But the father, he'd left him alone, gone to gather firewood, or so he claimed. He was negligent, reckless, and he knew it." A chill snaked down Emily's spine. "So you helped him cover it up?" Mark smirked, a cold, humorless expression. "I didn't help him cover it up per se. I helped him manage the situation. He was a client, a very well-paying client. He wanted the mother framed, he wanted everything cleaned up, quietly. And he wanted his money back from the insurance claim." "And Leo?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "Leo was gone. There was nothing to be done. But I found something else. The father had a secret, a very dark one. He was involved in some unsavory dealings, illegal gambling, a few other things. The kind of secrets that could ruin a man, especially a man with a lot of money and a public image to uphold." Emily felt a wave of nausea. "You blackmailed him." Mark shrugged, a casual gesture that made her skin crawl. "Let's call it leveraging information. He wanted his son's death to look like a kidnapping by the mother, and he wanted his insurance payout without any questions. I helped him achieve that. For a fee, of course, a significant one. Enough to get my own business off the ground. Enough to start our life together, Em." The weight of his words crushed her. Their life, built on a child's death, on a father's negligence, on Mark's cold-blooded exploitation. But then, Mark continued, his gaze hardening, the father started getting unstable. Guilt, maybe, or just paranoia. He started contacting me again, asking questions, talking about confessing. He became a liability. And liabilities, Emily, have to be dealt with. Emily gasped, a silent scream of horror. You killed him? The man, Leo's father. Mark didn't answer directly. He just looked at her, his eyes unblinking. I knew he was coming back to this place. He always did, haunting the woods. It was a matter of time before he stumbled onto something he shouldn't, or before someone else did. I had to ensure the past stayed buried, and that's where you come in. Me, she whispered, her voice cracking. You were getting curious, Em. Too curious. About that bear. About my past. About things that are better left undisturbed. This trip, it was a test. A way to see if you could still be controlled. To see if you could be part of the solution, or if you would become another complication. He paused, his expression shifting, a hint of genuine regret in his eyes. I never wanted it to come to this, Emily. I truly loved you. But some things are more important than love. He stood up, his gaze sweeping across the campsite, then into the dense tree line. The old man was close to digging up too much. He's been living out here, a recluse, but sometimes he'd go into town, tell stories. People were starting to listen. Emily remembered the man from the woods, his wild eyes, his story. A story that was both true and horrifyingly incomplete. But, Mark said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, he didn't just tell me stories about Leo. He also mentioned a hidden cache, a stash of money he'd squirreled away years ago, before his son's disappearance. Black market dealings. Enough money to make all my troubles disappear. Enough to start a real new life. I just needed him to tell me where it was. So, that was it. Not just to silence a witness, but to find a hidden fortune. Mark had lured her here, not as an accomplice, but as another loose end, a witness to his final desperate act. He needed to find that money, and then he needed to disappear. And Emily was simply in the way. He reached down and retaped her mouth, this time with a rougher hand. I'll be back, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I need to find a few things. You just stay put. Don't make any noise. Don't do anything stupid. He zipped up the tent again, leaving Emily alone in the oppressive silence. She heard him moving around outside, packing things, his footsteps crunching on the pine needles. Then, the sound of his heavy boots receding, growing fainter and fainter, until there was only the wind whispering through the trees. Emily was alone, bound, gagged, and utterly terrified. But beneath the terror, a cold, hard resolve began to form. She wouldn't just sit here and wait for him to come back and finish it. She wouldn't be another one of his complications. She would fight. She would find a way out. Even if it killed her, she would not let Mark win. She thought of the little teddy bear in her backpack, the one she had tucked away. Leo. She wouldn't just be a victim, she would be his justice. And that, she knew, would be her only way out of the shadowed pines. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Mark was gone. The crunch of his boots had faded into the silence, leaving Emily alone in the oppressive heat of the nylon tent. She didn't know how long he would be searching, but she knew she didn't have much time. Every second she stayed put brought her closer to becoming another one of Mark's complications. Her wrists were raw, chafed by the thin, strong rope. She tried twisting, pulling, grinding the bindings against the rough zipper of her jacket, but the knots were too tight, too expertly secured. Mark, the meticulous planner, hadn't left anything to chance. Frustration gave way to a cold, focused fury. Emily shifted her weight, rolling onto her side. She remembered the teddy bear, Leo's bear, still tucked into the front pocket of her backpack, which Mark had carelessly left near the foot of the tent. If she could reach it, she could reach the small, sharp mini-scissors she always kept in a zippered compartment next to the bear, meant for trimming embroidery threads. It was a flimsy hope, but it was all she had. She began to inch forward, a slow, agonizing crawl that taxed every muscle. The nylon flooring scraped against her cheek, the zipper pull digging painfully into her bound hands. It took what felt like an eternity, the silence amplifying the frantic, ragged sound of her breathing. Finally, she nudged the backpack with her shoulder, pushing it close enough to work her mouth toward the zipper. The duct tape, which had been perfectly applied, had left her lips slick and irritated. It took 3 agonizing minutes, grinding her teeth against the zipper tab, but she finally snagged it. Slowly, meticulously, she pulled the main compartment zipper down with her mouth. She could taste the grime of the tent floor, but she didn't care. She was focused. Her cheek pressed against the rough canvas of the backpack until she could feel the soft plush of the teddy bear. The tiny scissors were next to it. She used her teeth to pull the bear out slightly, then snagged the small metal ring attached to the scissors with her lips, pulling them out just enough to grip them between her teeth. It was awkward, painstaking work. She maneuvered the small blades toward the rope binding her wrists. The rope was tough, synthetic. Each tiny snip required a ferocious pull of her neck and a dangerous twist of her jaw. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The sound of the wind was the only witness. Snip, snip, snip. After what felt like a lifetime, the tension in one strand gave way. Then another. With a final desperate wrench, the last strand snapped. Her hands were free. Emily didn't pause. She ripped the tape from her mouth, a yelp of pain escaping her raw throat. She grabbed the camping knife Mark had dropped when he subdued her, the same knife he wore on his belt, and silently unzipped the tent flap. Chapter 4: The Race Against the Pines. The campsite was empty. The morning fire pit was cold. Mark had taken the satellite phone, the keys to the SUV, and the shovel, confirming his grim intentions. The knife felt heavy and cold in Emily's hand, a sudden, brutal source of power. She had to get out, but not back to the road. Mark would be expecting that. She had to find the man who had loved Leo. Emily grabbed the backpack, stuffing the knife and the teddy bear inside. She started moving, not following a trail, but scrambling down to the creek bed. She would use the water to cover her tracks, just like she'd read about in cheap thrillers. A tactic Mark would surely anticipate, but the creek was her only shield. As she moved downstream, splashing through the icy water, she realized Mark hadn't just brought her here to silence. He had brought her here because she was his alibi. If she was found, alive or dead, it would look like they were both victims of the wilderness, or the crazy old hermit. Her presence here was meant to confuse the narrative, to create a final, unsolvable mystery. Then, she saw it. Scratched deep into the smooth bark of a towering pine, about 10 feet from the creek bed, was a crude symbol. A circle with a small, branching arrow pointing south. It wasn't a standard trail marker. It was the same design she had seen faintly etched on the old man's worn leather backpack when he approached their fire. He hadn't just been wandering, he had left a marker. He was still searching. Emily followed the symbols, a desperate, silent prayer on her lips. They led her away from the road, deeper into the forest's dark embrace. For an hour she pushed through the underbrush, the pines growing thicker, the light dimmer. She was exhausted, terrified, but driven by a singular purpose, not survival, but exposing Mark. She came to a small, hidden clearing, and there he was, Leo's father. He was kneeling, digging methodically with a small hand trowel near a cluster of jagged rocks. He looked up, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He didn't seem surprised to see her, only weary. "They always come back here," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The guilt pulls them back." Emily rushed toward him, holding out the teddy bear. "It's Leo's. I found it. Your son's." He took the bear, holding it to his face, his body shaking with silent, racking sobs. "I never stopped looking, girl. I never stopped." She sank down next to him, her voice urgent. "Mark, my husband. He knows something. He was involved in the cover-up. He killed you, he killed your son. And he's coming back here. He said you mentioned a cache of money, a hidden stash." The old man's tears stopped. His eyes snapped up, sharp and clear now. "Money? He told you that?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "The only cash I ever mentioned to that blackmailer was a fantasy, a lure, something to give him a reason to stay away, to keep him quiet." He looked down at the spot where he was digging. "I'm not looking for money, child. I'm looking for the truth." He pointed to a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration in the soil near the rocks. "The creek used to run right through here 5 years ago. I found a small piece of fabric here last week. The same fabric from Leo's jacket. I think the creek moved the evidence, but the boy is still near." Chapter 5: The Final Reckoning. A sharp, familiar sound split the air. a twig snapping just beyond the tree line. "He's here," Emily whispered, scrambling up, the knife clutched in her hand. The old man stood, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the trees. "He followed me last night. He knows I've been digging." Mark stepped into the clearing, the shovel in his hand. He looked perfectly composed, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw Emily, free and armed, standing next to the man he thought he had already dealt with. "Well, Em," Mark said, his voice dangerously low. "You really are a complication, aren't you?" He didn't look surprised, he looked annoyed, like a chess player whose opponent had made an irritating amateur move. The old man was easy to track. He always walks the bank. "You killed Leo," the old man said, his voice quiet, filled with a deep, crushing certainty. "You ran him down and covered it up." Mark laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Ran him down? No. I found him. I found the truth, but it wasn't profitable. You were careless, sir. You left him alone when a tree fell near the water. It was an accident, but an accident that could ruin a man of your standing. I merely offered a service." He looked at Emily. "He left his son to die, Em. I just profited from the resulting mess." He advanced, lifting the shovel. "And now, I'm cleaning up my own." The fight was brutal and fast. Mark was stronger, but Emily was fueled by terror and righteous rage. As Mark lunged toward the old man, Emily moved. She drove the knife down, not into his body, but into his leg. A desperate, clumsy strike that sliced through his thick hiking pants. Mark screamed, a sound of pain and utter disbelief. He dropped the shovel, staggering back. The old man, seizing the moment, threw himself at Mark, tackling him onto the uneven, rocky ground. They wrestled violently, the sounds of their struggle echoing through the pines. Mark, injured but driven by desperation, thrashed wildly. Emily knew she couldn't win this fight alone. She scrambled away, searching for help, for a way out. Her eyes caught on the faint shimmer of light she had seen in the distance 2 nights before. The light. It was real. It meant a road, a house, people. She ran through the brush, ignoring the cuts and the blinding terror, running toward the light, leaving the frantic sounds of the struggle behind her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The ending, my friends, is never clean, never simple. Emily ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She burst through the last line of trees and stumbled onto a small, isolated dirt road. A faint, distant sound of an engine reached her ears. She collapsed onto the dirt, sobbing, waving her bloodied hands at the approaching vehicle. The police found Mark. He was alive, but barely. Subdued by the man he had tormented for years, tied with the very rope he had used on Emily, his leg broken, the knife discarded nearby. The old man, Leo's father, was gone. Vanished back into the pines, taking the shovel and the full, unvarnished truth with him. Mark went to prison. He was convicted not only of assaulting Emily but, thanks to the physical evidence found near the creek bed, and Emily's testimony detailing his confession, of the blackmail, obstruction of justice, and negligence that surrounded Leo's death. And Leo's father? He was never found. But Emily received an anonymous package weeks later, a small weathered leather wallet containing a single photograph of a gap-toothed boy and a note scrawled on the back. "The truth is free now." Emily carried the scars of the shadowed pines with her, the memories of the woods, the terror, and the chilling realization that the person closest to her was the most dangerous stranger of all. She had survived. And that, in a dark tale like this, is a kind of justice all its own.